I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call dispatcher. So as you navigate a concrete5 site, you'll see that unless you turn on pretty URLs, you'll see that all of the requests start with index.php, and then they have a path after them. And index.php is the one script that every concrete5 request has to go through. And if I look in my web root, excuse me, you'll see that index.php is simply one line that includes a file in the concrete root directory. And this is the dispatcher file. And we have this work because you can actually dump multiple copies of dispatcher in different directories for complicated server setups. And dispatcher.php looks like this. There's a lot of code in here, but not a ton. And we're going to step through this. This is the complete start to finish script that runs in a concrete5 request. First, we set up, this is the line of code, this defined C5 execute. This is the line of code that ensures that your concrete requests execute properly. So you'll notice that if I call that upgrade script that we saw earlier, if I call that directly, I get an access denied. That's because all concrete5 core scripts, whether it's a tool, a page, any PHP script in concrete5, should start with this line. And what this means is, does this C5 execute definition exist? If it doesn't, we die with the we halt execution with the message access denied. And here's where we define that C5 execute so that we don't halt execution. Here's some error reporting stuff. This is we set this stuff up because concrete5 used to show certain errors on certain server setups with certain error levels turned on. So we ensure that if you're running concrete5, we set the error levels properly. And here we include some core startup files. If you're interested in how Concrete does things like startup sessions or handles including of config values, things like that, you might want to check out this startup directory. This startup directory is basically contains a bunch of routines that are used when running the dispatcher. And now down here we connect to the database. You'll notice that this database function is found within the loader class. This loader class is in the libraries directory. It automatically gets loaded by the time you get up to this point, obviously, otherwise this line would fail. And you should be loading all of your classes, models, helpers, everything that you're referencing in your own custom scripts. If you need to load something in concrete5, there will be a method for it in this loader class. It's not good. Generally, you do not use built-in PHP include statements or require statements. We do in our startup, but that's just because we haven't actually loaded those things yet. You can see that this is how we load libraries in concrete5, and here's how we load up the core libraries that we need at the outset. So I have something called loader library object. That literally just means look in the libraries directory for the object library, and you don't have to add in, you don't have to add in PHP. So all these things do is these do is require the library that is necessary from within the libraries folder. And one reason why we do this way is because there is a lot in concrete5 to facilitate the idea of what we call overrides. And now is probably as good a time as any to start that subject off. If we look in the root of our of our install, you can see we have a lot of folders, and then I've been completely within the concrete folder, looking at things like libraries and models and things like that. And you might find yourself wondering, well, what is actually in this outer directory? And the answer to that is really nothing. These are all empty directories that could contain stuff if you wanted to add your own custom libraries, models, themes, whatever. And we do this so that you can keep the concrete directory clean, and then later on, if you want to upgrade concrete, you can either delete this directory or completely switch to a new, what we call core directory. So whenever we talk about the core directory, that's this concrete directory right here. And moreover, we have the concept of an override, and that means that if I go into the libraries directory and I decide to what's a good one? If I decide I wanted to customize the log library for a particular site I was running, I could go into the core libraries directory, copy log.php, and paste it out into my root libraries directory, and then make changes to this particular library. And when my library function called by loader looked for log, it would look in the overrides directory first. And we also do that because what we call packages, which are any bundles of code that you download from the concrete5 marketplace, which can be all of these different things, models, libraries, blocks, themes, etc., a combination of all that different stuff. Those packages call the same loader functions as well, and then they pass a package argument to that library function so that it knows where to look. But if you override any of that stuff in your local directory, it will look in the overrides directory as well. So these, in general, these directories for overriding stuff is a very powerful way to be able to maintain a different version of to be able to make changes to core files that you know will not be overwritten when you update your site. Now that doesn't mean that upgrades will always go 100% smoothly, but it does mean that you can upgrade your site, see where problems exist, and then be able to go to the new version of files you may have overridden and then apply the changes from those new files to your custom files. So moving right along, we get done including some core models, or core libraries. Now we do the same for models. Models work much the same. There's a lot of models that are required to run a basic concrete5 site. We require more stuff from the startup directory, and most of the stuff we try to comment pretty cleanly. So, for example, we have a localization library, which is that's how we handle translated concrete5 in different languages, and this is when we're requiring something out of the config localization.php. That's what we're doing. When you decide that you want to show errors in your concrete5 site or hide them, that's what the startup routine is doing here. And this is basically just loading a whole bunch of startup routines and configuring your concrete5 environment based on how your site's config site.php works. And that is what is here, and contains your database connectivity options and things like that. Then once we get down here, you can see we have a bit of PHP code, but this is all this is doing basically is getting the currently requested page based on the path found in the URL. And that's what the request library does here. We have some legacy settings that we need to honor based on upgrades and things like that. And then, if there's an error with the current page, we render the page not found page. Otherwise, we come down here, we pass our page to a permissions class, and if there's an error there, we check to see whether that page is something you're not allowed to see. Some more permissions checks. whenever you see the variable CV ID around, that stands for collection version ID. All pages in concrete5 are versioned. So if I make a change to a page, I can look at the versions of my pages. Oh, I guess I probably have to approve that first and then make a new change. You can see that there are multiple versions of this page. Whenever you see CVID throughout the code, that pretty much maps to either the word recent, which is the most recent version of a page, which only people who can edit that page can see, or a numerical version that actually maps to the actual numerical ID, CVID. And then there's some legacy stuff in here that is in there for different editing environments. And then some more error checking. And then finally, down here, this is an interesting one. Startup/process.php is probably the sort of the gnarliest file that we have in the core dispatcher routine. If you look in the startup directory, you can see all of these are very small. They're very encapsulated. These are all bits of procedural code. concrete5 is largely object-oriented, but a lot of it, since it is an application that involves users doing different parts of things to different pages in different runtime environments, there are some bits of procedural code. Most of them are found in the dispatcher and then in the startup directory. Like, for example, the if I look in URL check, you can see here's a procedure which basically forces your concrete5 site to render at the proper URL, that type of thing. If you look through here, you can see most of these are very small, and then we get to process.php. This is by far the most procedural and kind of gnarliest section of concrete5. It's this way because it's largely, we've added lots of functionality in concrete5 as opposed to previous non-open source versions of Concrete. But this is one of the biggest holdovers, at least in terms of how it is constructed. And this is just a big switch statement. So I wouldn't necessarily look too deeply in this, but basically anytime you make process.php is all about using the concrete5 interface from a using the concrete5 interface to make changes to your site. So when you add a block to a page, when you click add here, a form is being submitted behind the scenes with request parameters that make it go into this switch statement somewhere. And we won't go too deep in this because you don't need to know too much about this at all, but it's probably interesting to see where we might have come from. So here we go. This is the code that handles the add function in concrete5. And the reason that we put it in this process script is because we do literally need to include this on every page run, because it is quite possible that on whatever page you're on, even with regarding even whether you're logged in or not, it's quite possible that a particular post request to that page is going to be handling any of those particular operations, any page level content stuff. And that's why process.php is so large and is in there. And it is the last, basically pretty close to the last bit of code down here. Finally, we fire an event, which we can talk about events a bit later. They're a pretty powerful tool for developers to use, which basically fires whenever a page is being viewed. Other stuff can hook into that event. So if you want your own custom code to run every time a concrete5 page is viewed, that's going to be exactly what you want to hook into, and so we can talk about that. And finally, our view library renders our page. And that, runs a fair amount of code behind the scenes as well over here, determining which file to load for a given page type, and loading different header items for blocks and rendering content. But at its core, that's, there's a lot to it, but this is this is what happens on a particular concrete5 request. By the time render is done, the request is complete. Nothing else runs on a given concrete5 request. Oops. Finally, okay, so I will, since we're done with talking about dispatcher, I'll revisit the chat window. David asks if we've ever counted how many lines of code the dispatcher runs for one page request. No, we haven't. We've done some profiling in terms of database, things like that. And although as we continue to add new stuff, we typically make stuff work first and then try to optimize some of those queries second. We haven't really counted the lines of code per se, but that would probably be a pretty interesting thing to check out. And Oscar asks, will the amount of versions make an impact on loading time? That's a good question. It might if your database is, if there are either a massive amount of versions or your database is just really slow. We try to index the site so that a large number of versions wouldn't do that. But, you know, as people edit their site, we have found sites, for example, where admins have edited their homepage 2 to 3 times per day, which totally makes sense if they're using a content management system to highlight different bits of content on their site. And so it's not uncommon to see in those situations for sites that have been up for a few years, we've seen sites with thousands of versions of particular pages. And in that case, it is possible that it could make your site a bit slow, especially because there are certain aspects of your site that when you change certain things, we sometimes delete all the cache entries for all versions of a page. So it might not make rendering a page slow, but it might make editing that page slow. And so in that case, you know, it might be smart to back up your site and then I believe we included in concrete5.5, we included a what we call a job, which is jobs are tasks that you can either that you can schedule using a scheduler on a server or just run from within your dashboard. And we included a job called remove old page versions, and it goes through every page on your site and removes all except the 10 most recent page versions for each one. So you could click that and it runs it. And of course, since I just created this version of this site this morning, I don't have more than 10 versions of any page, so it didn't remove any. But I would back up your site and give running that a try if you're experiencing, if you have any questions about that, and you might be surprised how many versions it removes. And finally, we have a question about caching. We can talk a little bit about that toward the end if there's time. It's not typically on the developer intro, but yeah, we can go through the sort of general idea behind the concrete5 cache, and we can go through the general idea of the concrete5 cache and how that works. Sure. First, I'm going to talk a bit about. I'm going to get back into the idea of page types and themes. Because that's typically where people first start developing. That's typically where people first start when they're working on their own concrete5 site. So, as I mentioned before, I am running a site with the built-in Greek yogurt theme. But let's say I wanted to start working on my own site, and I wanted to actually use this theme as a starting point for a new one. So what I would do is I would go into the core themes directory and I'd find the theme that corresponded to the one I wanted to start from. You could totally start from scratch. You don't have to use themes as a starting point. We're just going to use it because it's easy. I'm going to copy this one, and as you might have guessed, I'm going to paste it into the themes override directory. So I'm going to call this developer theme because we're doing the developer training, and I'm going to go into uh, description.txt and name it properly. This description.txt shows up when it's time to install this theme. So now that I've created this, it doesn't actually show up as a theme that I can install on my site. To install a theme for your site, you go into the dashboard pages themes. This is found in the pages and themes section. And you'll notice these are the top items list all the installed themes along with their screenshots. And now down here there is a theme available to install. And it's got the same thumbnail image because I never changed my thumbnail.png file here, but if I wanted to, I could totally change that. And it has my new description text here. So if I click install there, it shows which page types, which templates are found in this theme, and I can return to themes. Finally, if I want my site to use this new theme for all of its pages, I can click activate and click OK, and my theme is activated. And now my site is using the new theme. Of course, since it's exactly like the Greek yogurt theme, you can't really tell. But if I were to go into, main.css, excuse me, and change some stuff in here, oops, probably need to I wonder. I've actually never customized this theme before. If I go into my themes header.php, I can completely start to mess around with changing it. So you might come in here and decide that you didn't like the Google font that had been installed, and so you might yank that font out and then start working from there. So we can talk a little bit about what's found in the developer theme here. All of these PHP pages map to my page types in my site. They have the same what we call handles. So if I look at page types, you'll see there's 4 page types in my site. Every page type you add in concrete5 has to have a handle, which is unique. Handle just means all lowercase, no spaces. You can see what they are here. Those map to the templates in the active theme directory. So whenever I'm adding a page of the full page type to my site, it knows to render using the full.php template. And that's all just PHP. So PHP and HTML. So I include a header and a footer from within my theme. That's just found within the elements directory. And then I just have HTML. So when I add a subpage using full, since I chose the full page type, it has a different form factor. It has no sidebar. And the reason it has no sidebar is because it's rendering using this full page type, which has no sidebar here. So if I actually make changes to this template and refresh, you can see those changes are reflected immediately in the page that I'm looking at. And finally, these templates contain concrete5 area code. And as I mentioned before, areas, although I kind of glossed over this, you probably know this if you've spend any time at all editing a concrete5 site. Areas are where blocks go, and they show up in edit mode. And to create an area on a page to make it editable using the CMS, you just add this PHP code. So you start PHP code, you create an area object and you give it a name, and then you display that area object. And the argument that you pass to that area object display method is the C object, which, since we used to call pages collections, C actually stands for the current page that you're looking at. And you'll notice that this template doesn't define C anywhere. That's because anytime you're looking at a concrete5 page, C has already been created, instantiated, and passed into your template by the dispatcher. So if I actually added some content to this, if I yank this out of my template, my content is gone, because this area code is what is responsible for querying the database and returning the blocks that are found within that area. So before I wrap up on page types and templates and themes, I think it's important to stress that themes and page types, they're very flexible. You can add as many page types as you want. If your theme doesn't include a template for that particular page type, the default.php file will be rendered. So I could add a page type for something called introduction. And I could create this. Notice it's looking for intro. If I add a page for this and choose introduction, it's not going to die. It's just going to use the default.php page template, which can be handy at times. And then beyond that, just in general, it's important to remember that the templates in a particular theme and templates within a block, templates anywhere, are just PHP scripts. We use our own, concrete5 API, and there's all sorts of concrete5 functions found within them. But at their core, you're not dealing with a special templating language like Smarty, if you've played with that in PHP at all, or any kind of additional templating layer. This is all just PHP code. So anything you do that you can do in PHP is valid within this theme. So you could, instead of doing this, you could say, I only want to show my main area in edit mode, which is totally valid. So for example, this is some code that checks to see whether I'm currently editing the current page. And if so, I show the main area. If not, I don't. So if I go back to my full example, you'll notice all of a sudden I can't see that main area. But if I click edit, it's back. That's because of that code that I added. And there's tons of stuff you can do here. You can, you could grab the block objects from the area and not display them, and then display them in a different spot. Any type of thing that you want to do. But just, it's important, as part of a developer intro, it's important to note that beyond concrete5, we don't have a lot of things that get in the way of manipulating pure PHP. All right, I'm going to take the opportunity to go back through some more questions since we've talked a bit about how templating works. This is a question from Ethan. He's wondering how might you make the sidebar wider? There's a couple ways you could probably answer this question, and I'm going to answer it from more of a developer's perspective. Let's go back to a particular sidebar page, and this might help sort of inform how themes and templates work. If I make this page into the left sidebar page here, you'll notice I get a sidebar area. That's because I'm loading up the left sidebar template here in this theme directory. And here we go with my left sidebar here, and I've got a concrete5 area in here, left sidebar inner. Now, how do you make the sidebar bigger? Since this is just, this kind of underscores what I wanted to just make really abundantly clear about concrete5 is that you can use existing knowledge that you have as HTML and CSS people in making this work. So if you were doing this in HTML, how would you say to yourself, how am I going to make the left sidebar bigger? Well, what you might do is you just say, well, this is all just HTML and CSS, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the CSS and I'm going to make the sidebar bigger with different CSS. And that's exactly what I'm going to try and do. So if I look in my header, you'll notice that we are loading, we have a bunch of style sheets here. We have a CSS reset, we have a grid system, and we load up our own style sheets through concrete5. And we use this get style sheet method so that we can actually let certain aspects of the style sheet, like certain colors in it, be customizable. But looking through this, I see, well, we're using the 960 grid system. So if I look in my left sidebar, our main content area is a grid of 16, and our left sidebar is a grid of 8. So I look here, those are the differences there. I'm going to just say, all right, I'm going to make it grid 12 and grid 12. And if I refresh, you'll see that now my left sidebar, my sidebar and my main are actually about the same size. And actually, one looks bigger to me than the other, but that might be because of some other style rules that are happening. Or maybe that's just an optical illusion. Maybe they are exactly the same. So yeah, so what I want to underscore is that any style, like this is all just HTML and CSS, and it all happens in real time. So if I wanted to actually delete this entirely, and now since there's no grid system style sheet on it, it resets over there, I could just add in styles to my header, just the same way that you add in styles anywhere. So I could grab my left sidebar container div, I don't know if this is going to work exactly, but so now you'll notice that, you know, I'm just treating this exactly like you would an HTML layout, and that's another thing to go into. Like when we started dealing with when we started really hammering out the concrete5 workflow, I've been building HTML and CSS sites for a really long time, and so the idea behind concrete5's theme and template setup was kind of born out of the way that I found myself designing, just dealing with delivering HTML, you know, many years ago when I used to just work on that type of stuff, which was primarily you would bundle up all the assets in a directory, and then you'd include a few HTML files that were different representations of the comps that you were building. So you might have one that was for the home page, and you might have one that was for an article page or a 2-column page or something like that. And the idea behind that was that you could take that directory, turn those HTML pages into PHP pages, and rework how the header works, and make sure to include the concrete5 header elements to make it make sure that you include this concrete5 element header required in your HTML. But if you did that, the idea was that you could seamlessly move your HTML, just complete straight HTML stuff, into concrete5 with just a minimal amount of PHP. So if you're customizing how something looks from a theme perspective, especially, you know, we rely primarily on CSS to do all of this stuff, and we should be getting out of the way in terms of adding lots of crazy stuff to a page. we try and get mostly out of your way and let you dictate using CSS how your designs work, even when the concrete5 editing toolbar comes into play. This next question from Ethan is, or is that just CSS stuff? So yeah, I probably could have answered this question in like a tenth of the time with just a yes, but I think that's probably valuable to get on here. Is just that the idea that it really is just CSS stuff. We try and get out of the way and make it easy to have your themes, your themes honor your current workflow rather than getting in your way. Oscar asks a question, is it possible to use custom page type thumbnails? This is a good question. It is possible. Ideally, I think in the future we're probably going to go with making these customizable from within the theme directory. Currently that's not the case, but you can use custom page type icons, and here's how. You'll notice if I go into settings for a particular page type, these are my built-in page type icons. But up here, in a way that you might miss it, to add your own page type icons, create a file set named page type icons and add files to that set. So what I might do then is snag one of these files. In my concrete5 file manager, I'll upload that file again, and then I will add it to a new set called page type icons. And then when I go back to page types, settings, you'll notice I only have one in there because I've created this new page type icon set. However, you can completely, for a site that you're working on, you can upload as many icons into that set as possible, or as many icons into that set as you want, and it will show up as available. It's probably not quite as graceful as including them in the theme, because the theme really knows what page types it has, so the theme, it stands to reason, should provide those icons. But as a quick way to get around that now, yes, you can do it that way.